There's no doubt about the very obvious fact that there are far more successful people in the United States today than there were when I recorded The Strangest Secret. It's perfectly natural for a person to want to be successful in the various categories in which success makes a difference, but the majority of people in the United States are not successful people in any of the important categories that make a difference. What are these important categories? Well, we might number them as 1, recognition. Successful people receive and give more recognition from and to others than do unsuccessful people. 2, self-esteem. This comes in part from recognition, but it also comes from the knowledge that one is in charge of his or her life and that it's proceeding along the planned route. 3, rewards. The rewards of success come in many forms, not the least of which, by any means, is in the form of money. Successful people earn more money than unsuccessful people and enjoy investing and spending it. They live in better dwellings, drive better cars, they travel more, they meet more interesting people, have infinitely more options. Successful people don't have to spend the final years of their lives, which, for successful people, tend to be the best years of their lives, in limited or unfortunate circumstances. Successful people enjoy life more and tend to enjoy more years of life. 4, change. The stimulation of change in our lives is of great importance. In fact, some experts in such matters believe change to be the second most important want on the part of people everywhere, right after recognition. As we've mentioned in category number 3, successful people have much more stimulation and change in their lives. They can go more places, do more things, meet more people. They're not stuck anywhere. 5, service. Successful people do a better job of serving others than do unsuccessful people, or they would not be successful. But their very success gives them more options and freedom to be of special service to others through foundations, libraries, hospitals, universities, the arts. The successful people of the country serve without fanfare through their donations to charitable organizations of all kinds. But the greatest service to the community by the successful of the world is through the means by which their success was achieved. Whether athletic star or singing star, business person, professional, whatever produces their success does so by serving the community in one way or another. To me, those are the 5 main categories in which the successful experience joy, satisfaction, and reward from being successful, and the unsuccessful do not. When I think of unsuccessful people, I think of those men and women who seem to be at the mercy of forces over which they seem helpless or uninterested in influencing. I was raised as a boy in such circumstances and came to know them well. During the so-called Great Depression of the 30s, I watched people who seemed helpless to do anything about their problems. Their most serious shortcoming was, of course, lack of education. They took their cues from those about them, which is the self-defeating cycle of the poor. They're always following the wrong group. Their teachers, the men and women with whom they talked and shared their misery, had no more useful information than they themselves had and couldn't help them. As I got older, about 12, I began to ask people questions about our situation and quickly discovered they knew no more than I did. They really didn't know anything at all beyond existing in the most reactive way. If someone gave them a job, they worked. If someone didn't, they didn't work. There was no attempt of any sort at autonomy. They followed each other in waves or schools as fish do. More than any other factor, perhaps, the unsuccessful person can usually be identified with a group. The unsuccessful person is at the mercy of events because the unsuccessful person plays that part. Que sera, sera. Whatever will be, or it is God's will. Well, America was built on the Protestant ethic that goes, God helps those who help themselves. The successful person does things. The unsuccessful person has things done to him or her. The successful person seeks autonomy and makes his or her own plans and has the self-esteem and inner excitement and knowledge to know that those plans can be followed, barring a calamity over which he or she can exercise no control. The unsuccessful person tends to focus on the calamity or ride with the punches. The successful person gives, the unsuccessful person takes. But since we cannot reap more than we sow, the unsuccessful person, sowing little, reaps little. Have you ever heard someone say, "I do no more than I'm paid to do"? Sure, we all have. And that person has stuck himself in a no-win fix. Doing no more than he's paid to do, that man can never earn more than he's receiving, other than just cost of living raises. He is an unsuccessful man. He cannot give his children the kind of information and encouragement they need if they're to succeed. He can't give much of anything to anybody. He simply doesn't have anything to give, as long as he maintains his present attitude. His attitude has got him stuck in a corner, and until or unless something changes it, in that corner he's going to remain. There's nothing at all that unsuccessful people have or do that successful people do not have more of and do better. Unsuccessful people are not stronger or in better physical condition than successful people. They're not nearly as good parents, wives, or husbands. About the only thing you can say about the unsuccessful is, as the well-known saying has it, God must have loved them. He made so many of them. The word poor still applies to far too many human beings in the United States. I keep hearing politicians say that we still have not reached the proper distribution of income. But income is not a factor of distribution. Income is earned by someone. If it is given to the poor, as it should be, it's because it was earned by someone else. A country as rich as the United States should have a level of subsistence below which no one should be permitted to fall. I feel certain that will be achieved, but what is needed most is the kind of education calculated to help people help themselves. And for those who cannot help themselves, the old, the sick, the incompetent, subsistence in clean, healthful surroundings should be one of our most important national goals. I'm delighted to see more women in business and politics, and to see more women succeeding. Women add a vital factor to whatever they influence that's been lacking and sorely missed where men only are concerned. And I have a persistent feeling that women will be instrumental in bringing peace to the world if that wonderful condition ever in fact comes to pass. There are just as many successful women as there are successful men, I think, although there are no statistics I know of to verify that idea. Certainly more women are learning that they can do whatever men do in the world, and as entrepreneurs they have their greatest opportunity for truly outstanding success. I think more women should think more creatively along such lines. Starting a business and succeeding in it is, of course, difficult and takes a lot more time than most of us like to think about, but it offers a great future for women interested in heading their own enterprises. It's the one place where ancient prejudices about women can't get in their way, and not even the sky is the limit anymore these days. About 35% of all new entrepreneurs are women. But the unsuccessful serve in one important way. They are endless consumers. They buy and gulp down breakfast cereal and hamburgers and eggs and salad and bread and everything on every shelf of every store in the country. Individually, they do not consume nearly as much as successful people do, but their numbers are so great they can buy so much laundry detergent and toothpaste and painkillers and shampoo you wouldn't believe it, and cars. God, do they buy cars and pickup trucks and vans and gasoline. These people are very important. And don't forget, they make the very same products they buy, in that they tend to work in places that make all those things. So bless their wonderful hearts, we need them. What kind of a fix would we be in without them? We need the millions of unsuccessful people from whose ranks we can recruit the successful people of the future. Where do you think successful people come from? That's right. They come from unsuccessful people. Even Her Royal Highness the Queen of England had unsuccessful ancestors, if you go back far enough. As human creatures, we all started even somewhere back there. In every family, somebody has to start the ball rolling if one of the members is to move from the ranks of the unsuccessful into the camp of the successful. When I was selling time on my own radio program in Chicago back in the 50s, I used to call on advertising agencies. I'd start out first thing in the morning, and I'd greet the receptionist with a big smile, announce myself, and say to the young woman, "And how are you today?" Without exception, I would get the reply, "I'm tired," and it was just 9 o'clock in the morning. How can people be tired already when they haven't even started working for the day? Of course, those young women were just remembering their lines. It was part of their culture to say, "I'm tired" in the morning. That was the sophisticated thing to say. That's getting back to the moving in crowds business. It's important to them that they all look and talk alike. But the fact is, they're not alike, really. No two of them are alike. Each is an original, never before seen upon planet Earth, with deep abilities and talents just lying dormant, waiting for the fertilization and irrigation of good ideas and enthusiasm to get them started growing. But their parents didn't tell them about that. They couldn't. They didn't know about it themselves. And their school teachers didn't tell them either. Do you remember when you first realized you were an independent, self-contained creature? I guess such a realization doesn't occur to everyone, but I remember when it came to me. I was a little kid walking on a sidewalk in front of our house in Los Angeles, California. As I walked along, it dawned on me all of a sudden that unlike the grass and trees and houses, I was free to move independently of anything else. I could walk around the entire block if I wanted to, and I did. And I knew at that moment that someday I could travel wherever I wanted to travel, anywhere on the face of the earth, although it didn't come to me in those words. It was a wonderful feeling, almost as good as flying, and it never left me. There's still much of the world that I haven't seen, but I feel that I still have plenty of time to see what I want to see and experience what I want to experience. Do you feel that way? Most people, especially the unsuccessful, live in tiny, tightly circumscribed worlds, just a neighborhood, really. Like sea anemones, they seem fastened to one place and manage to find sufficient nourishment for their needs. Here's one of the ridiculous comments I used to hear as a child when I would ask an adult if he or she was not interested in seeing other parts of the country. In those days, I wasn't even thinking about other parts of the world. They used to say in response, "I didn't lose anything there." That used to give me such a sinking feeling, as though the only reason anyone would ever go someplace different would be to find something he'd lost. Later, and much older, I realized it was their pet alibi for not having achieved the means to travel. Like the other alibis, like the boss wouldn't be happy if everything wasn't in triplicate, or only poor people are happy. That was one that I found particularly frustrating, even at a very early age. Why, I would ask myself over and over again, why wouldn't rich people be happy? It seemed to me they'd have every reason to be happy. Oh, and there was one for the people who went to college or otherwise got themselves a good education. This one went like this. "Oh, sure, he's got a college education, but he hasn't got enough sense to come in out of the rain." Did you ever hear that one? Did you find it to be as ridiculous as I did? It was an oxymoron, a non sequitur. If a person spent all that time getting an education, I would ask myself, why in the world wouldn't he have enough sense to come in out of the rain? I decided to find out. Successful people manage to be on top of things at least most of the time, and unsuccessful people do not. Things stay on top of them. They never take charge of their own lives and destiny. They don't set difficult goals for themselves. They don't seem to know enough. And of the great mountain range of information they don't have is the innocent fact that we become what we think about. If our definition of success remains the progressive realization of a worthy ideal, All those who are not engaged in moving toward the fulfillment of something they want very much to bring about in their lives may be called unsuccessful. But of course that's an oversimplification. People are unsuccessful who cannot serve for whatever reason. It may be illness, old age, infirmity, a congenital condition of some sort, lack of education, and misinformation. Millions seem to believe that it's wrong to deliberately set out to earn a lot of money. It is not at all wrong. A sound economic base is a prerequisite for nearly everything else we want to do. It also means we're serving people. Money is a fact of life. The more we have, the more we can do with it. It's the people with money who can do most for those without it. Poor people tend to serve little, and since their sowing is limited, so is their harvest. But by far the great majority of unsuccessful people are unsuccessful because of the limited nature of their information base, their education on this subject. Now, this doesn't mean they're uneducated on other subjects. They may well be. But if they don't know what produces enough money to live well, they will remain unsuccessful in the money department. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be unsuccessful people by any means. Some of the most successful men and women never earn very much money, but successful people tend to produce the wherewithal they need from one source or another. Followers of the late economist Dr. Shoemaker in his book Small is Beautiful know that the biggest isn't always the best idea. Our Mr. Steinberg, who was struck and knocked down with a car, not seriously, fortunately, must be called a successful man. He's not comfortable, as he said, but he makes a good living. He has his small store, his steady customers, and he's happy. All is well with his world, or at least it was until he was knocked down with a car. His goal is there even if it hasn't been articulated. His goal is to continue to serve his customers and enjoy his social intercourse with them, and make a good living. And in that he's successful. His goal is a modest one, as is his place of business and the demands made upon him. He has hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of brothers and sisters in the same situation. A young man who picks up and delivers our cleaning told me that his parents own the cleaning facility and that it's remained much the same size since the late 20s when his parents founded the business. His parents continue to work in the shop every day. They earn a satisfactory living. They're content, apparently. Their son, our delivery man, is not happy with the business as it is and cannot see himself working every day for the rest of his life in the business as his mother and father have done. There's got to be more to life than this, was his way of putting it, and of course there is. The people with the cleaning operation, like Mr. Steinberg, reached a level of competence and income that satisfied their needs, and they stopped growing at that point. Millions stop growing at a certain stage of their development, some at 17, others at 19 or 20, and millions at 30 or 35. And from that point onwards, they coast, making little or no effort toward self-improvement. Perhaps the most astonishing fact of all is the way people try to stretch an education, which for most of them ended at about age 18, and for those who went to college at 20 or 21. To take what is at best a very rudimentary education and then try to stretch it over an entire lifetime renders them woefully inadequate to properly cope with life's problems, and just as important, to fully take advantage of a long life's opportunities. As the society moves ahead, their inadequacy compounds. Like small children in a department store, they're not tall enough to see the brilliant displays of products, which we might call opportunities, nor mature enough to afford to buy them or qualify for them. They wander through life making minimum contributions and reaping minimum rewards as a consequence. That so many of them can live so well in the United States is a testimony to the viability of this abundant and productive free market economy and system of private enterprise. They're not successful people. They're simply beneficiaries of the system. In most other countries, they'd be much worse off than they are here. They're the that's good enoughers. They've done no more than absolutely necessary for survival for as long as they've participated, beginning in elementary school. If a passing grade will do in most of the subjects, they will, with the help of an overly lenient school system, find themselves with millions of other children pushed and pulled along until they reach an age when they can quit school altogether, or perhaps graduate from high school. That's good enough, they and their parents say. Seeking instant gratification instead of distant goals, they get along from day to day until they find themselves in the bottom layers of the socio-economic pyramid. They are unsuccessful in school and tend to think of their adult life as a matter of getting a job. Note the word getting. They're still in the childish give-it-to-me mode. I need a job, they'll say. They don't ever think in terms of service. They never ask themselves, how can I make my greatest contribution to society? In the understanding that their rewards can never exceed their service. None of them ever approaches a prospective employer with the idea of improving his business. They don't think in terms of the company's profit or loss. It's, what can I get out of this? They have the whole thing backwards, and they go through life that way, backwards. Perhaps from time to time they wonder why they remain at the bottom of the pile, but an understanding of how the system works is as foreign to such people as the language of the Tierra del Fuegans or the inner workings of the New York Stock Exchange. Most amazing of all is the total absence of the understanding of how a very good and satisfactory income is achieved. Yes, as we can easily see, it's a matter of lack of education. But it's lack of an education of a certain kind, understanding fundamental economics. There was also the complete misunderstanding of the very real fact that work can be interesting and enjoyable, challenging and wonderfully rewarding from a psychic as well as financial standpoint. It's quite possible to understand all of this and succeed dramatically as persons without a more formal education. Millions of well-to-do Americans have very little real formal education. Anyone who has done much traveling abroad knows that fact all too well. A few years ago, when our company had a large dealer organization, we took 100 or so prize-winning dealers and their wives on a special convention to Majorca, Spain. When our plane arrived back in New York after a week or so in Majorca, I witnessed one of our younger wives being greeted at the airport by her mother, and I heard her mother exclaim, "Majorca! I've heard of that place. Where is Majorca?" And the young woman, who had just spent a week there, replied, "I don't know, Mother, we flew." Such facts were of no importance in their family, and the young woman had passed through the educational system without any sort of working knowledge of the map of Europe, or of any other map. Since she had been unable to visually verify just where the plane had flown, Majorca might have been anywhere. On another trip, this time to Australia on a speaking tour of the eastern Australian cities, I visited Hobart, Tasmania, one of the loveliest settings, incidentally, on the planet. One evening at dinner with some Australian businessmen, one of them told of an interesting occurrence during World War II. On a trip to Washington, D.C., he had found himself at a cocktail party one evening. An older couple remarked on his accent and asked him where he was from. When he told them he was an Australian, the woman said, "Oh, yes, Australia. That's somewhere near San Francisco, isn't it?" as her husband nodded in agreement. "Well, what makes you think Australia is anywhere near San Francisco?" the astonished visitor asked. "Well, our son was stationed there for a while," explained the man, "and we had to write to him in care of the Army Post Office in San Francisco, so we knew Australia was right around there somewhere." Now, that's a true story. Their son was in Australia, and they had never been sufficiently interested to look the place up on a world map. It was the same with the mother and daughter with Majorca. With an impending trip to a foreign country, one would think the person who didn't know about the place would look it up in a reference book or an atlas. On a later trip to Australia, I took my youngest son, Ted, with me. Before we left, I had him read the entire section on Australia in the Encyclopedia Britannica. He told me on the flight going over how much more interesting knowing about the country had made the trip for him. He was perhaps 13 or 14 at the time. The sad fact is that the majority of Americans don't know very much about anything at all. They are pitifully undereducated and have little or no interest in anything calculated to add useful information to their lives. People raised in educated families, surrounded by interesting books and conversation, grow up taking information for granted. It isn't more difficult for them, it's just that they give more attention to factors that are lightly skimmed over or missed entirely by the uneducated. But there are, of course, the exceptions, the boys and girls from uneducated families who, often for that very reason, make up their minds to obtain good educations and break loose from the bleak traditions of the past. I remember reading about a study that was made of identical twins whose families had broken up or whose parents had died when they were very young children, necessitating their having been separated and raised by foster parents. In one particular case, the father had been a hopeless alcoholic. In their 20s, one of the twins had also become an alcoholic, the other a teetotaler. When asked why they had pursued such courses, each of them, not knowing the whereabouts of his twin brother, had given identical answers. What would you have done if you had had an alcoholic father? One had followed in his father's footsteps, the other, finding his father's life reprehensible, had opted for the opposite course. Being raised in poverty and ignorance will tend to keep the majority of children doing little better than the parents, than the milieu that exerts such pressures upon them. But there will always be those individuals who know instinctively that there is a way out, and determine to find and follow that way to higher, more interesting, more satisfying ground. After all, successful people are visible to the unsuccessful. They see them driving around in their fine cars. They see them in motion pictures and on television. But strange as it may seem when you think about it, the existence of such people seems to have little or no influence on the majority of the have-nots. It's a mystery to them. It's as though all successful people are simply born that way, ordained by fate to run things and be successful, live in beautiful homes and travel the world, while they, the unsuccessful, have been selected to live at the lower end of things. When they learn of some person making the grade from the bottom or the near bottom to the top, perhaps they charge it off to luck, like winning the state lottery. That beautiful statement in the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, is a political statement. It guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all men and women who are citizens of this favored land. But while their rights are guaranteed, the rest must be up to them. What they do to qualify themselves for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is strictly up to each of them. Happily, learning what we need to know in order to move into the upper echelons of education and reward is not all that difficult. It takes a certain amount of dedication and discipline, which, unfortunately for many, is looked upon as an invasion of those very liberties in the pursuit of happiness the Declaration of Independence tells us about. Dedication and discipline are needed to succeed at anything, even failure, and millions have the dedication and discipline to remain in the failure column. Sound economics is at the bottom of everything desirable. There must be a satisfactory financial base for our lives if we're to grow and accomplish more and experience more. Money is very important. Without it, nothing happens. With it, everything becomes possible. The old excuse, "it takes money to make money," is nothing more than that, an excuse. When you find the business you want and in which you feel confident of succeeding, there are a number of ways to obtain the necessary financing. But you must first become the person who can raise the necessary financing. That is, you must become a person of responsibility with a good track record and no slip-ups in the fair dealing department. Becoming well-to-do financially certainly doesn't solve all problems, but it solves most of them. There's a wonderful feeling of freedom, real joy in knowing you can do pretty much what you want to do when you want to do it, and that you can give a helping hand to those less fortunate. Becoming well-to-do tells us we're making a significant contribution to the community and does wonders for our self-esteem. And don't underestimate the fun of buying and owning beautiful things, such as fine homes, furnishings, pictures, and objects of art. Every man needs a toy or two to properly round out his life. For some, it's exotic cars. For others, a fine yacht, or at least a good boat and great fishing tackle. If a man likes good fishing, for example, with money the whole world becomes his fishing paradise. It's the same with a camera buff. Now the really great equipment can be his, and the beautiful and strange places of the world his to photograph. Money makes everything accessible. We've said that every man needs a toy or two. Well, what about every woman? Mary Kay, a delightful and very rich lady in her own right, and she started her cosmetic empire, incidentally, with $5,000. has commented that every woman wants a good diamond ring, a mink coat, and a fine car. Well, let me add that she also wants financial security, and she should have it. She should have enough money in her own name to guarantee a good life without financial worries. Money, like alcohol, as the saying has it, makes a good man better and a bad man worse. If a person is hard to live with or work around when he's on the way up, he'll be even more insufferable with money. But if he has a great attitude during the climb, it will be even greater when he reaches the upper echelons. In fact, a great attitude during the climb has a great deal to do with reaching the upper echelons. We're the same person with money that we were without it, and we need to keep that in mind. Money doesn't make us better people, not better than anyone else, far from it. It simply indicates we took some intelligent risks, and they paid off as we intended they should. As Pearl Bailey commented, "I've been poor, and I've been rich, and believe me, rich is better." And you can say that in every language on earth. As we've indicated, about 35% of all new entrepreneurs are women, and the figure is very likely to continue to climb. Women are marvelous business people. They have excellent heads for business and a very practical approach to most problems. From 35 to 49% of all graduate business school students, depending on which part of the country you're checking, are now women. The day is coming when company executives all the way to the very top will be equally divided between the two sexes, and it'll be better for all of us when it is that way. Young women should no longer think of themselves in terms of those jobs that were prevalent when American business was strictly a male domain. Women tend to have more company loyalty than men, and are slower to jump to another company and a better offer. It's true. Knowledge is power, especially that branch of knowledge that has to do with succeeding in a world where the majority does not. We become what we think about, and if we do not think, we become nothing at all.